Hi, welcome back to Leaders Speak at Stories at Work, a series where I speak with leaders from across the world and ask them to share experiences from their life that have shaped opinions they have, or sometimes the person they are. Today, I'm in conversation with Nitin Paranjpe. Nitin is the Chief Operating Officer at Unilever. He's also an ex-boss and a mentor. I asked Nitin to reflect on his early days and see if there are some memories he can pull out of incidences that have shaped opinions that he has. And this is what he shared.
This chance encounter was with the late Professor C.K. Prahlad. Professor Prahlad used to be on the board of HLL, as it was then called, and in those days he had decided that he would take a few young managers and spend some time with us. Often in what I would now call, somebody would call mentoring, but he never did it like that. He would have some of us around and he would ask us a few questions and he would offer his thoughts. And one of the questions he had asked me and 3 or 4 others who were there in that room at that moment was, Nitin, what do you think this company needs more of to be a greater company than it is today? And this was in the year 99 or so, 99, yeah. And I was relatively young and I was quick and I said, we must be more risk-taking. So I said, what does that mean? I said, maybe more entrepreneurial. And I kept offering terms like entrepreneurial, risk-taking, etc. But and he kept probing a little further. And none of my responses really satisfied him. And therefore, he then went back and there were these flip charts and we were sitting in this boardroom and he went back and picked up a pen and started writing like any professor would. And he wrote in the top row 2 alphabets, A and R. And once again, below that, he wrote A and R. And he turned around and looked at me and as if all of this should be plenty of explanation for what he was driving at. It meant nothing. So after a little bit of a pause, he went back and in that first row, he wrote A less than or equal to R. And that second row that he said A substantially greater than R. And then again looked at me as if all of this should be completely illuminating. None of it was, and then of course, and cut this long story short, as a professor, he dragged it out a little longer. In that first row, when he wrote A less than or R, he wrote opposite that a managerial mindset. And then in the row below that, he wrote an entrepreneur. And then went on to explain that the only difference between a manager and an entrepreneur is the relationship between these 2 alphabets, A and R, where A stood for ambition or aspiration, and R stood for resource. And he explained to me at that stage, a manager's mindset is one where ambition is equal to resource. So usually a conversation, when someone is in a managerial mindset, if you tell someone, I'm going to increase your brand support, he says, yeah, I can sell a little more. If you tell him, I'm going to reduce your resources, people, money, etc., he says, I'll do a little less. That conversation reflects a mindset where there is an equality between ambition and resource. That defines a manager. We've been all taught managers manage resources. But there is no entrepreneur in the world worth his salt or her salt who would allow for any correlation between ambition and resource. Most of them usually have a penny in their pocket, but aim of changing the world, going to the moon. And they never alter their ambition because they don't have enough resources. And an entrepreneur has the ability to allow this inequality, this huge mismatch, to stay in his or her mind. They don't feel daunted. They don't feel troubled. In fact, it is a source of inspiration. And it is this mismatch between ambition and resource and the fact that they stay with it allows for innovation to take place. When they find new ways of using that resource to use it differently, to get to that ambition, stretch it differently. And when they do that, that inequality changes to an equality. That's how innovation takes place. And a great entrepreneur, the moment he's done that, changes the ambition again. So it's a consistent and constant living with a mismatch between ambition and resource, which defines this. And that's what he said to me at that stage. And I walked away and said, wow. But the real message that he left behind in that story, which I reflected back, is many of us say I'm in the innovation department, I'm in this department, say how can we be in innovation unless we can be comfortable with this mismatch of ambition and resource? And that to me was the most profound thought which was left behind by C.K. Prahlad, which I had many opportunities later on to experiment with.
What a great explanation about the difference between a manager and an entrepreneur. Now, I'm sure you'll agree that if Nitin had just said that the difference between an entrepreneur and a manager is the fact that the entrepreneur does not allow his ambition to be dictated by the resources he has, and that the manager usually works within the resources, you would have said, that's an interesting observation, and promptly forgotten that. But now that you heard it as a story, you're going to remember it for far longer. And that is the power of stories. I hope you enjoyed that story. And if you did, hop over to our YouTube channel where there are multiple more stories. The Leadership Speak series has stories like this one, and the Story Bank series has stories that I've curated from across the world that you can use in business. And while you're there, remember to subscribe and also click the bell icon so that you get an alert whenever there is a new story. And we have 2 stories every week. Thanks for watching. See you next week.